Hi, this is Eric from longboxreview.com, a comic book podcast. And I am joined today by some very special guests whom I have not talked to in a while on my show. I've talked with them over on Twitter, and we have chatted before on the show, but they are back today to talk about their new podcast. I'd like to welcome back to the show Damian and Matt.
Woo.
Hi, guys.
Hey, everyone.
It's great to be here. You're our godfather.
Say that again?
Godfather. You're a godfather of podcasting.
Damon, you mentioned that before. I just think that's so funny. But thank you. I'll take it.
Well, I think because to us, you're a real human being who does podcasts, who we already know and like. So it made it seem like a thing to try and do. At least for me. I shouldn't speak entirely for Matt. But I think
definitely like what you do. And for me, I found comic book podcasts through you, and I found you through Travis via the YouTube space that Damian and I are more familiar with. And so, we credit you for bringing us over to the other side of the internet.
The other side, the audio side. Yeah. So just so I like to let my listeners know, we, Damian, Matt, and I are talking on YouTube. We're live on Google Hangouts, and as I often do, like with Travis, for example, and others such as yourselves, we'll record on YouTube, and then I transfer that over to the audio feed. So people can actually, if they want, if they're listening to this on my feed, they can come to the Longbox Review YouTube page and watch this discussion and see the handsome faces I have before me on my video here, and you can watch and instead of just listen. So give the audience the choice, right? That's kind of what we like to do.
Right, you can see the posters in the back of my room.
That's right. Damian has some great posters in the background. Matt has some books in the background. And every time I talk to someone with their books behind them, I'm always like trying to listen and engage with the guests, but I'm also looking in the background. Oh, what book is that? That looks interesting.
I think you can only see my DC shelf from here.
Yeah. All right. I just want to let people know before we get into it. Damian and Matt have released a new podcast called Never Stay Dead, and we're going to talk about that. But we're going to talk about some other things as well, comic book related, and maybe some other things. But I just want to let the listeners know that if you have not listened to me talk to Damian and Matt before on the show, the last time Matt, you and I talked together was episode 104, which was the Rose City Comic Con discussion that we had, in fact, with Damian that time. So that was almost 2 years ago. So it's been far too long since you and I have talked on the show, Matt. So I'm very pleased that you are here today. And of course, Damian and I talked to last year, the last Rose City Comic Con that we attended, and that was episode 126. So people can go listen to those as well. And we guys, we got to do this more often besides Rose City Comic Con time.
Definitely.
I'm down, but there is a Rose City Comic Con coming up. So
that's right.
Yes, we should return to the same pub and record in the same booth again.
That would be awesome. Matt, are you going to go to the next Rose City Comic Con?
I better. I bought the tickets and everything.
Oh, great! That's great. I wasn't sure if you were going to come or not.
Before he gets here. So.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I can't wait to see you guys and take in the goodness that is that con. So we'll have to get together like we did before. I will be better prepared if we want to record like we did last time. I won't run out of room on my card in my recorder like I did the last time we got together. So,
well, once we get talking, it doesn't
stop.
Doesn't stop.
yeah. And I also feel like I need to have a little sign that I put up at the table at the booth to let the waitress know that we're recording. I don't know. Maybe they're just used to that Rose City Comic Con time.
It adds a little atmosphere.
That's true. That's very true. All right. Okay. So like I said, Matt and Damian are producing a new podcast together called Never Stay Dead. But before we get into that, I just kind of want to go back a little bit to the beginning, because I know I have not talked to these gentlemen about this specifically on the show. But I thought I'm always interested in why people get into comic books, why they decide to talk about it on YouTube or in podcast audio form. So we're going to talk about those things a little bit. So I don't know, gentlemen, who wants to go first? Who would like to summarize their comic book origin story for the listeners?
I feel Damian should go first because his history begins before mine.
And mine too.
I am the eldest.
The wisest.
Back in 1970, or was it 71? I'm not sure. I convinced my parents to let me buy one comic book while we were on a long, boring vacation, and it was the beginning of the Kree-Skrull War, drawn by Neil Adams and written by Roy Thomas. And that instantly hooked me, and I became obsessed with comics thereafter. And my parents were very against them. They were raised in that Wortham era idea that comic books would literally make you a bad person. And they sort of believed that at first, right? To fight for every comic for a while. And that added to the addictiveness, I think. And then I did the typical thing around age 16. I sold all my comics. I'd grown up. I was going to date girls instead and drive cars. And then when I went off to college at 18, there was a comic book store in the city that I was going to college. And I discovered the first issue of Daredevil that Frank Miller wrote. And that re-hooked me. And so then I, throughout college, bought pretty much every Marvel and most DC comic that was coming out at the time. And then ever since then, on and with sometimes off because of finances or busy life, have always been a comic book fan. But I never connected with other comic book fans, except, once or twice, like one kid in my junior year of high school. And I can't remember if I had any comic book friends in college. So anyway, once I discovered YouTube, where there was this thing they were calling the YouTube comic book community. And at the time I started watching, there were about 50 or 60, mostly guys, a few women, just chatting informally about comics, including Matt. So that way he's my elder. I suddenly felt a burning need to talk about comics that I had been repressing my entire 50 odd years. Well, 40 years of actually reading comics. So then I kind of exploded as a comic book chatter on YouTube and have, I believe, about 600 videos out there of varying.
How many?
600, I think.
600. Wow.
To be fair, when he was started off and when I was starting off, videos had to be 10 minutes.
Right. There was a time limit.
Yeah.
But now there are hardly any time. Matt and I once did a live chat that went for nearly 4 hours. Either of us could find an end point. You would think you'd run out of stuff to say about comic books after 2 hours or something, but no.
Well, Damian, that reminds me of our conversations about, Danger Club.
Yes, that went far too long, didn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it did. I think I surprised you at how long I could chat about that particular comic when we were recording.
But I enjoyed it thoroughly. I only worried that no one would listen to the end or anywhere near the end. But who cares? We had fun, right?
Yes, that's for me. That's really what counts. Is the great conversation that I have with my guests on the show, and just like you, I love comic books. So how can that be bad, right?
Right. So, but podcasts seemed like a larger step up to make. And so I think it really was only getting to know you, originally through Travis, but then you and I have developed a fun friendship together just from times you've come to Portland that started making me think, why not do podcasts? Eric does it.
And if Eric can do it, anybody can do it.
And your podcast is one of my favorites. So combine those two things, and it put the idea in my head. And then Matt was talking about podcasts, and I was a little resistant because I do so many videos and I have a fairly large audience there. But in the end, I decided it was, who knows how long we'll want to do the YouTube thing. And I don't know, it's just interesting to do it in a slightly different way. Mm-hmm. And I certainly am an addict to podcasts on my commute and such. Mm-hmm. So it's more accessible, depending on what your life circumstances are. YouTube or podcast might be the better way to indulge in these comic book conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Like you, during my commute to work and also at work, when I can, I like to listen to as many comic book related podcasts as I can, and as well as other things that I like to listen to. But it's hard to do that from the YouTube side. Just in terms, because I use my phone to do all this stuff, right. All this listening. I can't watch YouTube on my computer at work. So
yeah, I can.
Yeah, I'm so jealous.
I listen to a lot of YouTube as if it's a podcast, but then I have to find the ones that aren't too visual, that are just people gabbing.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's for the really visual ones. I have to stop and look at my phone. I just can't do that during the day, so I end up focusing more on the audio podcast. But it's nice to have that choice.
Yeah, and the YouTube thing has exploded and then splintered in many different directions.
Right.
So it's become harder and harder to find the kind of comic book videos you want there. Mm-hmm. Podcasts, I guess, are a bit similar, but somehow it's easier to filter things on the podcasts, or you get recommendations from other podcasts and then you go try them out. Mm-hmm. Like I went to George and Tony and to Peter Rios and that kind of thing. And the guy who does Stuff Said, that professional artist who does a podcast.
Oh, Greg Schiegel, yeah.
All of those I discovered because of you. So,
good.
So it's very important, and we should do it more on our podcast to recommend what podcasts you're enjoying, so that people, because it's a good source of information.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of that, so just we've mentioned Travis now. He's kind of really in my mind, he's kind of the podfather in a way, because through him, I encountered both of you on your YouTube channels. And Damian, you had just mentioned Matt was doing videos before you. Is that right? Or you discovered Matt first, or I forget now.
Matt was doing it before I was. So he was part of the kind of cluster of people, at the time, small cluster of people doing videos regularly about comic books in a casual, I'm a slick YouTube channel way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, since we're transitioning to that, Matt, what about you? What's your comic book origin story?
All right. Well, so it starts when I was in third grade, and the teacher was forcing us to read so many, small books a month or whatever it was, and I was refusing to read anything. And my mom came in to talk to the teacher and figure it out, and she looked at the bookshelf, and it was all like ponies and princesses and kind of that area of stuff. And she said, well, he is a boy. Do you have anything maybe a little more geared that way? And the teacher did not get it at all. And my mom just looked at me and said, what do you want to read? And I don't know where it came from, because I'd never seen one before, but I said comics. And she said, okay, well then let's go buy you a comic. So we go to the corner store. This is back when you could do that, so I'm not so young myself anymore. We got a Batman Adventures number, I forget if it was 3 or 4, and it was a story about the Scarecrow robbing people of their ability to read. And it was a two-parter. Weird. Yeah. And so I was hooked, and I had to get that two-parter. Not only did I read through this book, the cover's fallen off, it's in tatters. I read that thing to death. And then I was begging my mom to get the next issue before it came out, and she was just trying to figure that out. And so, yeah, I started getting comics regularly, and that led to some other stuff, but I just stayed with the comics from there. And I never had that period that I hear a lot of people talk about where they said, I went to colleges about girls or whatever. It's like, if girls couldn't deal with me reading comics, I wasn't dealing with them. I didn't bring it up at first, but but in college, I'd buy trades, whatever. I was going through Transmet Preacher, but I'd always be getting Birds of Prey, Deadpool, and Spider-Man through that time, or as Cable and Deadpool in that era. And I kept a very tight pull, but I was always reading comics all the way throughout. And right after college, that transferred to me wanting to talk YouTube. I had seen some shows on YouTube, and there's more of a want to have like a background and make it look like a show at the time, or treat it like a not just like the way we think of podcasts now, but in the way that they used to like film Howard Stern or those kinds of guys, and have like a studio and try to bring in people or whatever. That kind, like a radio show more than a podcast. There's people doing that vibe as well. And I was just like, I want to talk comics, but I'm just going to sit myself somewhere and just do it. I'm not going to try to make a big deal about it. And apparently a handful of other people had the same idea right around the same time. And slowly some networking happened. For me, Damian was actually one of the first people who reached out and wanted to actually talk comics.
Really?
So yeah, I mean, there's a handful of people beforehand, but you had a sensibility that other people didn't have. Me not liking Batman has kept me from talking to as many people online about comics, more so than anything else. And that was a big factor there.
That's funny because early on, one of the sort of influential on me videos was you responding to Howler Mouse, who had been responding to you. And that sort of introduced me to the idea that people were making videos that were interacting with each other's videos.
Which is funny because I made that video because he wrote about some comic. It caught
Howler
my
Mouse
eye.
is another YouTuber who's fairly popular in the YouTube comic book community.
And we had a falling out since then, so we don't talk now. But
we don't have to worry about that in this case.
Yeah. But yeah, there was some comic that he had, and then I went and I checked it out and I read it and I just hated it. And respond back. It was Astro City Confessions, and having read more since, I think Confessions was the worst possible one for me to start on. Because it was Batman centric, basically.
Right. Because I was just thinking, that's a really good one. But yeah, for you, maybe not.
Oh, and it's Batman as a vampire and the religious thing. Not my book.
Anyway, that was, at the time, things are less genial on YouTube then. But at the time, they disagreed and they each made fun videos about it. And everyone was good friends and everything. But yeah, now YouTube is a little less friendly.
So it's really interesting that each of your parents' responses to the comic book thing, right? Damian, your parents were resistant,
right?
But Matt, yours was your mom sounds like she was very much supportive of this. And also, just a side note, it's weird. It's unusual to hear a situation like yours, Matt, where the school setting did seem to be catering perhaps less towards the male centric readership. At least in terms of your specific teacher there. It's usually the other way around is why I mention it. So it's unusual, but it's just weird that the two of you, given your origins in terms of your parents' responses, and now look at you together. I think that's just really cool. Comics brings us together.
There's a generational thing there, right? His mom might be my age or might have been my age.
Right.
Since she's passed away, but.
Well, the other thing too is my mom read Superboy comic books growing up, and a handful of other things here and there. So
okay, well, yeah, and that's probably unusual too in itself. Because I tell you what, my parents did not read comics, and as supportive as they were, because my dad was a voracious reader. I mean, he loves science fiction, reads a lot to this day. And so my family was very supportive of my desire to read. However, I know my mom was not always, she didn't think I should waste all that money I was spending on comic books. Not that she cared about what I was reading. It was just a matter of why are you spending your money on comics? So yeah,
and my wife worries
very
about that
interesting.
to this day.
How much were they then?
Oh, when I first got into comics, they were 35 cents.
Oh wow. Okay.
And I could only get like a handful, 3, 4, maybe 5 in a month. I had an allowance,
Right.
but and I'd do odd jobs as much as I could, and that's actually that's why I decided to get a job. Actually go work in a restaurant or something, to make more money. It wasn't because I wanted to save up money and buy a car or anything like that. I wanted to read more comic books.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Well, my brilliant discovery as a kid, 10, 11, was you could get all your relatives to give you subscriptions at Christmas time. And that was my way of getting a lot more comics.
See, that's brilliant. Because I knew about the subscription thing because I read the ads in the comics that I was reading, but I never thought about that. That I wish I had now.
They were all folded in half, but I got to read them.
Oh.
Yeah, there is that.
But they weren't in that good condition anyway when you found them at pharmacies on spinner racks.
Right, exactly. Yeah, all those bent comics. Yeah, I have a lot of those in my collection.
Comic shops are already a thing by the time I got past my Rite Aid or whatever it was.
So when did you start thinking about the shift from the YouTube to the podcasting side of things?
Oh, so I had a bit of a career shift, and I was commuting more in my car that let me use my phone so I could listen to podcasts on the way. And so I booted up Eric's podcast because I was like, okay, let's listen to comics. And I went through a few of those, and I started thinking, other people have to be doing this. So I started poking around. And I found this Spider-Man network, The Amazing Spider Talk, where after catching up with, they do seasons, and I caught up on the season they're doing about Lee Ditko. And at the end, the head guy, Dan, was like, we're looking for people to help out and do more, whatever. And I was like, yes, let's do that. And that all resulted in me doing my other podcast, which is the Untold Talks of Spider-Man. And so I was doing that. But while I was figuring that out, Damian and I decided we wanted to do more stuff. We landed on doing a podcast to make it different. And that's when Never Stay Dead came in. But it was me listening to podcasts and realizing this was more what I wanted to be. Because a lot of YouTube is people showing what they bought in the week, talking about maybe current things or comic book news. And that's not so much my gear. I like diving in and talking about like a handful of issues or a trade or something, trying to find a little more in those pages than being so hip and current, basically.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I noticed this a while back, because I actually don't do a lot of YouTube videos such as yourselves in the past. But I noticed a trend about 2 years ago, I think it was, where everybody was doing videos about the stuff they were getting that week and just kind of talking about things, but that was it. And like you said, maybe some comic book news. Travis and I do that on occasion now too, but that's really just an excuse for Travis and I to get together and talk comics. We just chose that format as the excuse, but yeah, it was really interesting that this seeming change in the YouTube comic book community to do that particular kind of show, and yeah, like you, Matt, I kind of prefer something a little more in depth is probably not the right phrase to use, but something beyond just a few words about whatever new books are out that week, I guess. So that's one of the things I like about your show. This is a good transition. Never Stay Dead, because you guys really get into the particular issues or topic that you're pursuing in those episodes. So your show really tailors to me in terms of the things I like to listen to about comic books.
Right. We choose a specific topic or like small series of issues that could be very old or fairly recent, and focus our conversation on just that. And that was not something I think that ever many people did on YouTube. Like there are in-depth discussions of current comics like Travis's Roundtable, and like some of the videos that Matt and I have done in the past. We did on YouTube do some where we would try to attack some specific Spider-Man issues and that stuff. So that was maybe the tryout for this podcast. But it does seem like a podcast is a better way, or possibly a better way to when you want a more narrow focused conversation.
So that's a very interesting point. I'm hoping you guys could elaborate on that a little bit. Why do you think an audio format podcast is better than YouTube for this?
Well, so I think it's different. There's kind of a different focus. And it's funny because right now we're talking on YouTube Live and all that, and we're seeing each other talk. And there's kind of all this, I mean, not that it's bad, but there's kind of this visual noise of us talking. It's just talking heads. When you're sitting there and it's only audio and you've been reading this book and you're kind of digging in, you've been kind of mulling over in your mind, like, okay, well, what are the aspects I want to talk about? Anything to the characters, the setting, the, history of this book, like in itself or contextually to when it was created, anything like that. It kind of creates a different space versus just jumping on and being like, we're going to talk comics, but no real, I don't know, pregame, I guess. Although when we did do some of the YouTube stuff, we did pregame, like Damian was saying, like we dove in on some Spider-Man villains, which I loved. Going through Mysterio, that made Mysterio one of my favorite Spider-Man villains.
Which is funny.
It's serious business, Damian. But we took, the funny part was there's actually not that many Mysterio stories, all things considered, with him being one of the most recognizable of Spider-Man's rogues. But when we pulled out the stories generation by generation, we started finding stuff and weird connections, like this weird connection to psychology early on that gets dropped after a certain era and other things like that. And you find it as you go. And then you find it by talking to each other. There's always things Damian considers that I never would have thought of. I don't know if that's vice versa. But...
So do you think it's, and we actually have Travis in the chat here. I'm going to get to his comments here in a second. But do you think it's a matter of, by not having that visual aspect, like visual blinders on, so to speak, we become Daredevil, but that allows you to concentrate more on the particular topic, more and somehow more in depth, because you don't have that visual distraction of us talking to each other? Is there something else going on there?
Do you have something, Damian? I want to.
Well, I know that my view on it is a little different. I kind of miss the visual side, and I think that the narrowing by making it just audio forces a little more formality on it. Like I could take a long pause and be grinning, and my audience is getting a little something on a video that they get my facial expressions responding to things and such. So that narrowing down to audio, I think in a way is a little harder to do. Assuming one has to get used to seeing one's face on video, which is another whole other thing. But so I don't know if it's better, but it definitely so far has run a more formality to it. I feel like we have to be a little more thorough and that sort of thing, because we don't have the visual side helping us along. But it is weird talking about comic books and not being able to show them, which is the great thing about YouTube. Yeah. Like if I'm talking about Batman, as I'm doing, I can hold up the specific picture that I'm complaining about.
Spoilers, Damian, spoilers. Some of us haven't gotten that issue yet.
There's no spoilers.
No spoilers anywhere in this comic, in a way.
Yeah, well, just to bring in the chat, just real quick, Larasa mentions Batman 50 isn't something I would recommend. So yeah. I'm getting that sense. I will get my issue, I think week after next. So
of course
reserving judgment.
you loved the War of Jokes and Riddles, and that was where Matt wanted to literally murder all of DC
Right.
Comics or something.
I remember that discussion from your show. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And Batman 50 is worse.
Well, I'm really looking forward
Actually,
to reading
no,
this issue
that's
now.
not true. That's not true at all. Batman 50 had a lot of amazing artistic talent and pinups.
You just spoiled the main good thing about it.
Yeah, well, spoilers. There's a lot of good art in a comic. If that's ruin your day, I don't know what to tell you. But for me, it's kind of the opposite. I think the audio allows a focus, and not having this visual thing means I don't have to worry about how my face looks at any given moment, because I do a lot of stupid things when I'm not thinking about it. Like a moment ago, I'm sitting here doing kind of the thinker pose. I'm like, that just makes me look solemn and weird, and I don't want to deal with that. Also, when we do the podcast, there's kind of this forethought of like, I have to edit this, so you kind of pay attention to what it's going to be. And I think that overview later means you feel like you turned out more of a product than you just kind of talked and walk away. And if people grabbed a beer and listened in or not, that's that. So.
Yeah. I mean, seems to be, I don't know why podcasts have to be more formal than videos, but somehow it turns out that way.
Yeah, it is kind of weird because I guess I kind of take that approach too. But I also, for the videos I do, which are really just an excuse to record easily with people, just so I can release it in the audio feed. So I do these talks, have guests on like we're doing right now, but it's always in mind for the audio show. I will take the audio from this video and edit it. And that's how I try to focus things. I prepare notes the same way. I do a preparation the same way that I do for a video as I do for my audio only recordings. So to me, the distinction is less different, I guess, than perhaps what you guys have said before. But I want to throw in here. Since Travis made some comments, he says, YouTube haters, why are you even on here? It feels kind of weird to be talking about this stuff, given the context by which we are recording. But, there it is. Well, and then also he says, podcasts are just more easily mobile. That's the only difference. You are just choosing to make one mean something over the other. Perhaps we are.
There is maybe a group think about what a podcast ought to be.
Exactly.
And there's so much on YouTube that there's less rules or less unwritten rules because there are so many people doing so many different things on YouTube, Yeah.
I think I agree with Travis. We are kind of arbitrarily defining the differences between, I think, YouTube and audio only podcasts. But, I chose to do the audio podcast thing because YouTube wasn't quite up and running the way that it has turned out to be. I'm very grateful for the technology that they've released over the years so that we could do this. But I just prefer to do the audio only podcast. I really think what we say about the YouTube comic book community, you could say the same about the podcast, the audio podcast community as well, just in terms of the number of people doing it, the subject matter, the approaches. I think it's all very related. It's just one particular medium versus another. And so, Travis notes the pre-canned podcast is not as lively as video. Perhaps. I don't know. I've listened to some audio podcasts. They're pretty lively. But anyway, I'm sorry, Matt, you were going to say.
I disagree somewhat because YouTube used to be more open, used to have a lot of that feel. They've changed it. So it used to be, if I watched one of Damian's videos, on the right side, I get a bunch of videos of people talking about comics. Some I may have heard of before, some I wouldn't have heard of before, but there'd be this connection. I could go find people, and there used to be more of this community where we could dig through. And I should commend Travis for keeping that community going, keeping that discussion going. And he is like clockwork with that. He's one of the best things about comic book YouTube. And so for him, I kind of get it. But if you step away from Travis's circle at all and being able to maintain that, subscriptions won't necessarily show up in your feed. If you get alerts, those won't necessarily show up. If you have a podcast, it will come through and you can listen to it. And if you're irregular with uploading, as long as people put you in their feed, they can find you and listen to you when they want to. YouTube, just if you're not in that moment, you're lost. And that's killed the ability to kind of do comics for me.
YouTube discoverability has become less good, but it's still, in my mind, better than when I type something into iTunes and what of the other shows that it offers me. I agree YouTube is not as good as it once was as a technical way of discovering things, but I don't know that I find it hard to find podcasts. And I really rely on the recommend. I would never have found Stuff Said, for instance, without hearing about it on another podcast, this podcast in specific. But anyway, it's not worth arguing all the things. I think Matt,
that's fair.
The bottom line is Matt's a little more pro podcast than I am, but we both like podcasts.
Well, and really, ultimately, what it comes down to is, regardless of the medium, we are talking about our, one of our, if not one of our very favorite things in life, which are comic books, right? And all that entails. So,
and the awesome thing is to have found, we all three of us have found each other and some other people who we can talk comics with that back in the pre-technology days, so to speak, the pre-internet days, we couldn't do. We might have found other people, but this is a really great way to do it now.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
so, Damian,
sorry, go ahead.
You just mentioned iTunes. So let's transition specifically about to talk about your show, Never Stay Dead, which you can find obviously on Apple Podcasts, or as we used to say, iTunes.
Have they changed the name? I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, they did a rebranding some months back. It's now Apple.
Yeah, so search on Never Stay Dead.
Never Stay Dead.
And you will find it, or go to Never Stay Dead at podbeam.com.
Yes. So Never Stay Dead. So let's start with this. Why that name?
We were just throwing around a lot of names, and they were mostly all bad because all the good ones are already taken, it felt like,
we landed on a handful, and then we'd search it and find that someone already took that for some comic book related podcast.
Yeah, that's tough nowadays.
And so when we randomly threw out the name Never Stay Dead, I don't even know which one of us said it, or may have evolved through a series of iterations till we got Never Stay Dead. Then we both liked that one, and it seemed to sort of, in a jokey way, sum up a lot of comics because no character ever dies, or character stays dead.
Yes, so that's the obvious choice, right? Is like, oh, they're commenting on this very long-standing comic book trope, which is characters don't stay dead. So yeah, was that just a fortunate happenstance, or you? I don't know. What do you guys remember? What the origin of that was in terms of that particular phrase?
We were just throwing around so many names, and it was like, what would stick? It's like trying to name a rock band or something. Like, eventually, just land on something. And you're like, okay, there you go.
And now that you ask, I think it does symbolize something that maybe Matt and I share, which is we love comics, but we're not damn serious about it. We're just having fun, and we know there's a lot of goofy stuff going on it, and we kind of revel in the goofy side of it along with the serious artistic side of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Now I can say that's the reason why we have that name, I guess.
Okay, so that's the name, the reason for the name, but I forget now. I think, Damian, maybe you touched on this earlier, but so why, or maybe Matt, you did. I can't remember now, but one of you said something about getting this going. So talk about that. Who prompted who to get this going? Why did you guys want to get together, the two of you, and do this podcast?
Well, so we've been doing a handful of things on YouTube, and we wanted to try to. We were talking about doing something more like that, but making it a bit more formal, but find some format that would allow us to talk about whatever we wanted to talk about, but create some consistency or whatnot. Which I guess is great for me because Damian has a way bigger viewership on YouTube than I do. So it's all for the love of the game. But
well, I think Matt and I always were trying to do videos together. And so I think as Matt caught the podcast bug, and I already had been vaguely thinking because of the Podfather, the godfather of podcasting, to give it a try, that it just kind of transitioned from trying to get together more often live on YouTube to trying to get together more often to do podcasts. We still kind of don't do it very often. More my fault than Matt's, because I just have trouble clearing space. When I do one by myself, I just wait. When I do a video on YouTube by myself, I just wait till I have a moment where my family's not around and I just flick on the camera and start talking. But when it's two of us getting together, it takes more planning. And so I had thought maybe somehow by making a podcast, I would somehow manage a more regular schedule. So far, that hasn't happened.
Yeah. The road to podcasting is paved with good intentions.
Yes. And Matt has another podcast that he's more committed to a larger group of people because it's part of a network. So I think that probably has a stronger draw there.
Well, I don't know. I'm happy to do what we do. Basically, when it comes to scheduling, whoever asks for time first gets it. So
right.
I try to be magnanimous, but it tends to be more regular scheduled the other way. So, yeah.
Yeah, it'll usually be something where I'll suddenly on Friday afternoon say to Matt, "Are you free to do a podcast tonight?" And usually he's not, because I usually am picking a Friday night or something. But he does a good job of being flexible compared to me.
I have a question to that for you, Eric, actually. Have you noticed since you've taken on, because you do the Legion thing with Rios, you're doing whatever you all do with Travis and all that.
And let's not forget George, because that's also
I did forget. Have you found that's really changed your reading habits and how you go about going through your pile and whatnot?
Not what I read. When I read it, perhaps. Okay. It definitely slows me down in terms of what I'm reading and when I read it, because I'm always reading with an eye or ear or mouth, whatever, towards what I'm going to talk about next and with whom. So, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about that before. It's considering what you guys were talking about, getting to, finding time to get together to talk. What I was thinking while you were discussing that was I have the same issues, because, like you say, I now have semi-regular get-togethers with Travis, Peter, and George, and trying to find the time to do those and do my own, the solo stuff that I like to do. It could be very challenging at times. And I find myself, because, our discussion now is an excellent point, because I approached you two some time ago. I don't remember exactly when I first brought it up. But then I sat on it for a while, contacted you guys, I think like 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And we had to postpone it about a month because of your schedules and the cons that you were going to, or, the other things. And then finally to where we are today. So really, it's if it impacts me in any great way, it's probably just trying to figure out, okay, if I'm going to talk with this person about this book, I got to read that one before I read all this other stuff, because, like I say, I take a lot of notes. So I have to focus on that. And so that's, actually coming up after our show, after our discussion here, I've got like 3 others that I'm preparing for, and there's a lot of stuff I got to read and take notes on. So it's very it's a very interesting challenge in time management, but it doesn't affect the way that I consume the material, other than, like I say, to look at it obviously beyond just surface entertainment.
Okay.
Has it affected you, Matt, since you're doing 2 different podcasts? Your reading schedule?
It has. Because whenever I try to do a deep dive on other things, like currently I'm reading through Lone Wolf and Cub, or just started to, I'll see how far I get. That's the sort of thing that I'd start and would very easily drop because there's no kind of thing to keep me going through, but I'd be enjoying it or something like it, and then I'd have to do something with someone else, but it was much more rare. But now I'm always reading a little bit of Spider-Man, and I'm reading whatever Damian's putting me onto, old Kirby, usually. And it makes this time for me reading something off the beaten path feel a little more special, because that's kind of like my secret comic book time that I don't have to talk to anyone about. I don't have to try to like think about or take notes. And it lets me kind of treat it differently. And it's been having me approach comics a little differently.
Oh, I wish it worked that way for me.
I do worry that I might save my comic book talking time for the things that, if we did this more often, the things that we've decided to talk about. And so the other things I read would be left untalked about, because particularly my videos are almost like a reading diary. So part of me, now that I've gotten so used to talking about comics, is sad whenever I don't talk about a comic. And lately, more because of life things, I've read a lot of comics that I haven't really talked about. Sometimes I'll put in a sentence up about them on Twitter or something. Anyway, so I don't think our podcast will ever get that busy that it will really affect me in what I read, though. But Matt's other one plus this, I can see that's a.
And I'm part of a comic book club in state where they hand us a graphic novel and we go talk about that once a month.
I forgot all about that.
And you do that in person in a group, right, Matt?
Yeah.
How is that? I've always wondered or thought about starting something in my own community in that way, but again, it's really about, I'm really selfish with my time because I don't have, like Damian is alluding to, I don't have a whole lot of time to spend because I have all these other things I want to do. So I've just kind of put that on the back burner. Maybe down the road I'll do that, but I've always been very curious about other people who participate in those things. And on top of that, does that affect the way that you approach anything on your shows?
Well, first off, so it's a small group usually, and they always get a lot of people saying they're going to come, and they offer a discount if you buy that book in the month. So a lot of people pick up the book, but only a handful of people ever seem to show up. And so the discussions usually kind of range somewhat similar because you're seeing the same 5 guys and one random person coming in and out. But it's still fun. It's a little rough because they try to limit the talk to an hour or to be within an hour, so it ends up being shorter. And when you're going amongst that many people and you're starting off with, did you like the book or not? It's a little slow going. By the time it feels like we're picking up speed is about when they want to axe it. It's a little frustrating for me because I'm willing to talk longer.
and obviously get into more the meat of the story, right?
Yeah, and last time in particular is frustrating because they picked out a Ninja Turtle story that is my absolute least favorite Ninja Turtle story of all time. And digging through that was it was kind of funny though, because it's the first time we've shown up to club and they went around. It's like, who liked this book? And other than the person at the shop who picked out, everyone's like, no, I did not. But yeah, and I'm
Well,
sorry, what's your...
that makes our podcast sound better because it's like a mini book club of two people.
Yeah.
And we always go in depth, sometimes too far. Because one episode, Matt picks something, the next episode I pick something, and we go back and forth. And we are each picking something that we think, for whatever reason, the other person ought to read or would be interesting to talk about and everything. So it's a guided by great minds podcast. Although we're not telling anyone in advance, I guess, what we're doing, so they can read it too. But it's a podcast, so they can go and listen to it at any time.
Okay,
Right.
great. So I was actually going to ask you that question about how, because you have, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 episodes, right, in the feed right now?
So far we have 6.
And I want to talk about a little bit of those in a minute, but I was wondering, how did you decide why did you decide to talk about the particular things that you did, and how do you decide what you're going to do in the future and all that kind of stuff? So it's just back and forth. Whose turn is it next?
Well, the next podcast will be Matt's choice.
Right.
And we already know what that's going to be. So then after that, I guess it'll be one of my choices. And we had discussed. I already
know what that's going to be.
Oh, right. We already know what that's going to be too.
Yeah.
So we can say it's going to be the Galactus trilogy from the early Fantastic Four. Mm-hmm. And the one coming up next is a couple of the early mutant turtles, with Matt focusing on one that he thought I would like, which he was right. So we're both, well, to lesser or greater degrees, we're thinking about what the other person might have an interesting reaction to. And we've known each other quite a long time now.
Yeah. So initially the process started out very adversarially because Dave and I like talking, but the overlap between comics we read at any given moment or what we're looking at is about nothing.
Right. It's become more so, right? When in the earlier YouTube days, I think we were reading more of the same books than we are now.
Yeah, well, when I was picking up the entire New 52, it was easier to find comics we were both buying. But I've dramatically lessened the amount of comics I buy, especially since price increases and my tastes have kind of narrowed. And I feel Damian has a little bit, that you still have a massive pull.
Yeah, I'm still a massive pull guy. Yeah. And you're not, but you used to have a bigger pull.
Right. I've gone to more trade waiting and not reading a lot more, I guess.
I feel like I'm kind of like the midpoint between you guys because I still have a bit of a pull, but like you, Matt, I've decided to wait for trade on a lot of newer stuff, just to save some money in the long run. And most of the time, the comics end up not really being worth it for me. So,
yeah, I remember when I was picking up a lot more stuff, it felt like comics were around $2, and it was a lot easier for me to try things, let a run out, give it a second shot, that sort of thing. With it being $4 to $5 every issue, and $5 keeps popping up more and more. It feels like a bit of a sucker punch if I buy more than 3 issues that I don't like, because at that point you can get the trade usually. Mm-hmm. So,
well, if my shop discount went away, I would definitely be dropping an enormous part of my pull, because I get 25% off of anything at the shop because I have my pull list there. So that has a big effect on me.
We've talked about this many times. Damian not only has 25% off, he also has access to comics I can't buy because he lives in Portland. And if you throw a rock, you're going to hit 3 comic shops.
Yeah,
that is very true.
I'm always very jealous of that.
Where I am, I effectively have 2 comic shops. There's the one that's a half hour away, but is close to where I work. And that's been my comic shop since I was a kid. So that's like my shop. It's a 10% discount for the books that are on my pull and nothing else, which is far more limiting than what I've heard from pretty much anyone as far as what they get. And then there's a secondary comic shop that is an hour's drive away, and that's where the comic book club thing is. And there's like one book I'm making sure to pick up there because the other place doesn't get it. And so I can find some random things. But like when Ditko was put, and we should say rest in peace, Steve Ditko.
That's right.
I bring this up because I was looking for Mr. A comics when we were in Portland. David's like, "Oh, he's been doing it. It's on the shelves," and I'm like, "What?" You know. And so I picked up an issue there, but for me to get other Mr. A issues, I had to go to the Kickstarters that he was running and order them online. Like I could never expect to find those in the shop or even order them through my shop.
Well, that's interesting. They wouldn't order them, or
I mean, if I asked, I probably could have, but it might have come with a bit of a tariff. Or
Diamond, I don't think.
Yeah.
You'd have to order them directly from Robin Snyder, the publisher of them.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's two shops here in Portland amongst the many that regularly do order them through her. I don't know if the other ones would know how to or not. So that is particularly obscure. He's basically like an underground publisher, or was until a few days ago. So we will probably be talking about Mr. A at some point. I still have some Mr. A stuff I haven't mailed before that.
Oh, at this point, I'll just pick it up, right?
Yes, at this point, you might as well.
So that was one of my questions. Going to be one of my questions. Though, basically, what's the mission of the podcast? And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just trying to convince the other person that they should read or like this particular set of comics or stories or whatever. Because I say that.
No, I don't think that's the mission. Do you, Matt?
I mean, in a sense, when I'm picking out these comics, like I have to pick, but there's a lot of stuff that I know I like that you will never like. And I'm like, well, I can't do that. I want to hear what you have to say about like this particular run of Spawn, but I don't know if I want to put it on you. I don't think you'll like it, but I imagine you'll have a very interesting reaction.
Well, if it were 30 issues of Spawn, no, we're not going to do that. If it were a 5-issue run of Spawn.
There's one singular issue I want you to read.
I take our mission to be that we're looking around for interesting bits of the comic book tapestry to discuss, very specific ones, so that we're taking a look at interesting parts of either comic book history or just the art form of comics, either good or bad. So because we've done the first appearance of the Black Panther, and we've done the first appearance of the Inhumans, so both of those, we're doing a lot of early Kirby stuff. Suddenly drawing a blank on the other ones we've done, but we did I Kill Monsters just because Matt thought that was an interesting, unusual one, and then it turned out there was a movie coming out which he didn't even know,
which we found out the day before we were going to.
So we're looking at interesting little bits and pieces of the comic book world as a way just to kind of take a look at it.
So you're being a bit glass half full, and I'm being a bit glass half empty. But I think what comes from that, though, and what I thought we kind of landed on accidentally, not intentionally, was that by us throwing this at the other person, we have someone who knows and has a bit of a history with the work, but someone who's coming at it relatively fresh. And through that, like, I'm hoping that, like, that gets the listener, all our millions of listeners, to potentially go and check out these comics or think about them differently or whatnot, and just kind of creates a space where hopefully they're getting something more out of it. And it's a small hook, but I think it's a decent one.
I totally agree, and it's definitely hooked me. I just real quick, I just want to run through. Damian already mentioned a few, but I want to run through the episodes you have released so far. Your first one was Black Panther versus Fantastic Four. And I assume, Damian, that was your choice, right?
Ironically, I think it was sort of brought up by you, Matt, and then approved of by me. But we knew it was kind of my choice because it was my era.
Oh, right. I mean, the Black Panther movie is coming out. I wanted to read some Black Panther, and Damian's like, why not just read his first appearance? I think.
Oh, did I say that?
Suckered me into Kirby that way.
And that worked well.
Mm-hmm.
And then next was I Killed Giants, which you just mentioned. And then the next two, you jumped into more modern stuff with your Action Comics 1000 retrospective, which I tell you what, guys, that one and the next one, which was the Rebirth Batman episode, man, while I enjoyed the other ones because just because the historical and I guess the impact of those particular books, those two DC centric episodes, I really, I don't know if you do this, guys, when you're listening to your podcast when you're commuting and whatnot, but I often will be listening to stuff and there are times during the shows I'm like talking back to the to the podcasters as if I were in the room together. And yes, man, I was doing that so much on your Action Comics 1000 Rebirth Batman episodes. I so wish I had been part of those because there's, and that's the wonderful thing about comic book podcasts, comic book YouTubing, is all the different perspectives, all the different opinions about these things. And we don't have to agree on everything. And you are sometimes exposed to ideas that opened your mindset a little bit about these particular characters or stories or eras or whatever. And that's what I love about this stuff. That's what I love. That's why I listen to all these comic book podcasts and I watch the YouTube videos when I can. And I really enjoy the way that you two are trying to, one, introduce things to each other, and two, convince each other of certain aspects of the topics that you're talking about.
And I have two things to say that, actually. The first is I went through your Superman 1000 episode, and you softened me to a couple of the smaller stories. I think you found things I missed in a couple pages in particular. In particular, I think it was Snyder's The Lex Luthor at the Planetarium one.
Mm-hmm.
You completely changed my opinion on that one. And Damian found stuff too. I think I just didn't read that one very closely.
No, but neither of us liked that one initially. I did learn from Eric on that one also.
Well, and I will say I learned stuff listening to you guys on that particular issue as well. So it really made me pay attention to because I read the issue, listened to your episode, and then I formulated my notes about the comic. In fact, I hadn't even really decided I was going to do an episode on that until after I listened to your show, because I felt like I had to, like I said, I had to respond in some way, and I couldn't obviously do it, I wasn't involved in your show, but this was my way of getting that out of me, that reaction as I was listening to your show. And so in my notes, I had some things in there to point out as a reaction to what you brought up. So so in a way we were doing this back and forth, just in totally different feeds and totally different times. And I to me, that kind of meta aspect of podcasting is something I really love.
That's funny. I remember you mentioned us once in particular, but I thought you mentioned other people, and I thought this was coming from all over the place. So.
Well, it was, but there were specific things from that I was, in the whole of it, I was responding to things that you guys had brought up. So it was, like I said, it was a really good way to help me focus some of my thoughts about that particular issue.
Always feel free to call us out, if I said something wrong.
Especially Matt.
Yeah. No, I feel like I go on more limbs, so that's totally understandable. The other thing I wanted to say was I was listening to your and Travis's most recent venture. Oh, man, there was a moment where you were talking about the formatting of digital comics and the loss of the page that... Oh man, I just wanted to dive in and just mention 50 different things. It was a whole topic, and I
was diving in on that one because I was listening to it live and writing comments. So there's still a nice thing about YouTube. It's the live comments, which we're getting a few here, mostly insults from Travis, I think.
loving insults.
Right.
But La Raza's here. Hi, La Raza, and Carlos Infante, both people that I know well from YouTube.
Yeah.
And Travis, of course.
And Travis.
And Travis.
Yeah, and La Raza asked a question that I want to get to before we leave here. So we definitely will get to that. But I just want to mention the other couple episodes real quick. I really enjoyed the Probing the Grand Design, which was about X-Men Grand Design, right? That's the name of that?
The new book, X-Men Grand Design.
Yeah, by Ed Piskor, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to talk about.
That's a book that I have been interested in, although I will admit I'm not a great X-Men fan. I enjoy the stories I've read in the past, but it's not something I seek out. And but hearing you guys talk about it just made me want to read it all the more. So that was really nice. I basically you guys are vetting these comics for me. So I really appreciate that. And then you like your latest one, you mentioned this already, but it was about the Inhumans. I have noticed out of the 6 episodes, 3 of them are Marvel based. So I'm sensing a bias here, maybe.
So, look, if you look through comics history, by and large, if you look for the bigger, more explosive, socially charged, or more relevant moments, it tends to be Marvel. DC, I'm not saying DC is apolitical, but they tend to lean more apolitical. And I don't know.
It was for politics that we did the Inhumans issue.
Right. I'm just saying, when you get to big explosive things, it tends to be a bit more Marvel. DC does a lot of great comics. Month in, month out, it all evens out in my mind. But when you look for the bigger moments, DC has a handful of great standouts, and they're 90% Batman, it seems. But Marvel tends to have great stories for every one of their characters. Or not every, but most. And I think there's something to that. I probably am a little Marvel biased. I'm finding right now I'm basically dropping all my DC and I'm buying a bit of Marvel and a bit of other things.
I think there's a lot of DC that's worthy of our attention in the way we're doing things. But part of my interest in talking to Matt is our generational difference. So I really get an extra pleasure in rereading some old Fantastic Four that is brand new to Matt. Matt knows the Fantastic Four, or he knows the Marvel universe in its more modern incarnation better than I do. But I know the earlier stuff better, and it adds an extra layer to me to reread it with Matt. So that's not the raison d'etre of our podcast, but that's like one of the things feeding into it that makes it fun for me to pick those. But I could just as easily pick All-Star Superman. I couldn't remember the name of that, or something like that. There's all kinds of wonderful, juicy DC things from the more modern eras, but we either haven't gotten to them yet, or we've covered them on YouTube too much, or because we did a whole series on All-Star Superman as the example.
And that's the thing. Everyone's talked about All-Star Superman. Everybody's talked about The Dark Knight Returns. Everybody's talked about V for Vendetta and Watchmen,
including us on YouTube.
Yeah, and we went through Hush. It's just... Look, DC needs some bigger hitters, I think, is what it is right now.
No, they have some huge hitters, which is why they've been talked about so much. But we haven't talked about any modern Marvel yet. Perhaps we will.
We did talk about modern DC.
Right. We hit 2 modern DCs. And I'm reading a lot of Silver Age, Lois Lane, and Superman with my daughter. But every time I read it, I don't feel like there's a lot to discuss with Matt about it. There's a lot to discuss about it with my daughter. It'd be great if I could get her on a video talking about Lois Lane comics. But I'm not sure Matt. Great. Well, maybe someday we will. Maybe I'll figure out what the ultimate Lois Lane comic book to read is. But
so, are you guys when you're reading books, just sitting down and reading books? Are you thinking, oh, this would be good to talk with Matt, or vice versa?
Sure, except
Are you
there's too long of a list of things already that we're not getting.
Do you guys do you have lists for each other for things already, or do you just kind of organically, this week I thought about this particular book or set of stories that you want to talk about with each other?
We're often chatting in that Gmail chat box. That's how we've often communicated while we're both at work. And so I think we've thrown back and forth a lot of stuff. I'd have to go back and look through it.
We have a list somewhere, and I don't know, but like Grand Design, I just finished. It's going to be, there's more releases coming, but I finished what had come out recently, and I said to myself, like, this is something interesting in and of itself. And I know Damian doesn't like X-Men too much, but this felt like such a unique way to talk X-Men in a grander scheme. And I'll say it because Damian was really hesitant about it. He didn't want to buy another comic book, which is funny. But
only one I've been hesitant about so far, and it turned out well. I enjoyed it a lot.
It holds up on its own, and so I thought that worked out.
Yeah, I had just before that book. Well, when that book originally came out, I just thought it was a gimmick, and I would not be interested in it. Let's get some of the hipper readers who like Fantagraphics to buy a Marvel comic, is what I viewed it as.
Did the discussion alter your view of that, Damian?
Well, just reading it had already altered my view, and then talking about it was a lot of fun. But so yeah, there's that whole book club thing of being forced to read books you wouldn't pick yourself, which can be too much sometimes when you're a member of a book group. But with just two of us, at least half the time we're each reading a book we picked ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay, well,
we already know our next two podcasts, and we have somewhere a list of a whole bunch of other things we're thinking of. But I think beyond the next two, we haven't decided what we'll do next.
Been trying to get Damian to just sign on to read the entirety of Cerebus, but that hasn't happened.
What? No, you haven't. I would like to read some. I have said yes to Cerebus, but we need to narrow it down to something smaller to talk about, I think.
What? Okay.
Because I still have that giant pull list of new comics to read. They'll fire me from my pull list reading job if I don't read them.
You said Larasa had a question?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to transition to that. So, people can go listen to Never Stay Dead, the great new podcast. But Larasa asked specifically, what is the easiest way to find comic book podcasts? And we already mentioned that towards the top of the show. She also adds, because like Damian said, it hasn't been easy for her about that. So I don't know, guys, if you disagree with this or not, but I think the obvious answer to that is and maybe people have an aversion to Apple products, but via iTunes, Apple Podcasts is probably the easiest, best way to find a comic book podcast. I know that Google is here in the last month or so. They're really increasing their footprint in the podcast arena, and really pushing Google Podcasts. So just like we talked about earlier, Apple's rebranded their podcast arena as Apple Podcasts instead of just referring to it generically as iTunes. Google has done something similarly. You would normally, if you are in the Google subscription realm, you would go to the Google Play Store to download your podcast if you use that platform. Now they're referring to themselves as Google Podcasts. So podcasting in general, I think, at least in terms of like the big two, Apple and Google, they're really starting to, I guess, take notice. I mean, Apple's been on the podcasters' side for a long time, but they've just kind of treated us as I don't know. There's this other group of people that do this thing besides listen to music.
Right.
But they're really starting to promote that. They've introduced, for those of us, maybe you guys have seen this, stats that they're providing now, download stats and all that kind of stuff. So they're actually giving us that data as well. I'm sure Google is going to be doing the same or something similar to that. So those are probably the two biggest, but really, I think most current podcast apps that you can get on your iOS or Android phones, doesn't matter which app you use, really. Most of them, I think, have a search function, and a lot of those actually use the Apple Podcasts feed. They subscribe to the Apple Podcast feed and then bring that stuff into those apps. I'm sure if it's an Android phone, it's probably Google Play, but you can pretty much find a comic book podcast. The problem is the search terms, and I don't know what you guys did in terms of your particular podcast, but because you have to put in certain metadata for your show, hopefully to be able to, or to make it easier for people to find your show. And that's always been the biggest thing for me in terms of the podcast production, is figuring out, well, what do I put in my tags, hashtags and metadata and all that kind of stuff to kind of get the show out and noticed, so that more people will find it and listen to it.
Well, I would like to add, like when I search through there, I often find the really big shows like iFanboy and Word Balloon, but I didn't find yours until I heard about it from Travis and knew to look for it. And now I've been finding things by following a lot of people on Twitter, and maybe following you on Twitter has led me to other podcasters. And I don't even know now how I ended up following all these people. But I find out about their podcasts from Twitter sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a bit of a work to drill down into the podcast world, I think.
Yeah.
So it is good to tweet it. If you find a good podcast, put it on Twitter or mention it in your video or mention it on your podcast if you do podcasts.
Exactly. Hence this episode.
What I would say is, I mean, I don't use iTunes. I use another thing. But what I started searching for wasn't like comic book or graphic novels, though I did try those. What I found was drilling in on a franchise or character. So typing in like Spider-Man or X-Men netted me finding a handful of podcasts I really enjoy. I put them on to Damian. He didn't like any of them, but it's a different way to
give them a chance.
You like what you like. Yeah, so just a different way to go about it. Although you're going to end up with a more focused podcast, but
right.
I'm sure there's a million Batman ones. I haven't looked.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Well, gentlemen, we have been talking for over an hour now, and I didn't want to keep you too long. This is at the time that we're recording this. This is lunchtime for us, and I haven't had lunch, so I'm getting a little hungry. So I think this is probably a good time to let you guys go. And we were going to talk about some other things, but like I said, I don't want to keep you too long. And maybe we'll just get back together and talk about those things down the road.
Yeah, and maybe we should have you on our podcast if we can ever figure out that schedule.
I would be honored, gentlemen. That would be awesome.
And we'll all be at Rose City Comic Con, so we can just record a bunch of drunken things then.
That's right.
Mildly inebriated is probably the more honest way to describe that.
Slightly tipsy. That's, we're enjoying ourselves after a long day at the con and having some good beer. Hopefully.
Do people podcast sober? I don't.
Matt, I actually tried that once where I popped open a beer and I was drinking it as I was recording, and I never did that again.
Oh my gosh. For one of my Spider-Man podcasts, I drank then smoked weed to get to it because I really didn't want to do it. And that was an interesting experience.
Okay. All right.
Next on my video channel, Matt smoking weed.
Yeah.
I'll never do it in here. I don't want that to touch the comics.
Eric's a purist. He'll only do heroin when he comes to play.
Eric does not do heroin, folks.
That's
Who
right.
are you going to believe? You can't contaminate the comics.
Exactly.
All right. Things are falling apart very quickly now. So, like I said, I think hunger is setting in, making us all a little bit loopy. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk to me about your show. I love the show, obviously. A big fan of it. I'm very much looking forward to new episodes that pop into the feed. So remind the folks what's the next one you have planned coming out, and when, possibly, if you know.
It's about the Donatello solo issue from the early Turtles, which is a tribute to Jack Kirby, and we don't really know when it's going to come out, but maybe next week.
Great. Okay. Well, I definitely be looking forward to that whenever it comes in. Why don't you, each of you, remind everybody where, if they wanted to, they can contact you, ask questions, more questions about the show if they have any. Also, point them to your YouTube channels if you'd like, or any other things like Matt's Untold Talks of Spider-Man. I said that correctly?
That's it.
His other podcast that he's doing now. So go ahead, Damian. Why don't you go first?
Okay. You can, if you search under Sleepy Reader 666 on YouTube, you'll find my channel and all 600 videos. You should watch every single one.
Exactly.
And none of them have aged a bit. And a good idea is to follow me on Twitter, where you can, I'll when I put up a new video or a new podcast, I'll mention it on Twitter. Or if you want to chat with me, I'm always chatting on Twitter. So that's Sleepy Reader 666 on Twitter.
Right. The hub to all things me is on Twitter at MagicalMatt42. So MagicalMatt42. And I post whenever I deign to do a YouTube video anymore, or post when a podcast is up, either Never Stay Dead or Untold Talks, and talk plenty on Twitter too. And if you want to talk comics with me, nothing makes me happier as long as you're not a jerk about it.
Well said. Well said. All right. Again, thanks, guys. I really appreciate this discussion. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys at Rose City Comic Con and whatever we talk about and there, which is at this time, just a couple months away?
Yeah.
Early September.
I cannot wait. All right.
Well, before we go,
okay.
I just want to say thank you so much, Eric, for having us on. It's always a pleasure, and putting out our podcast like this, it's a great boon, and thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Ditto. It was great to be on.
All right. So if the listeners in the future who've downloaded the audio version of this, or if you are watching this on YouTube, you can leave comments about this episode in the chat or the comment box below, or you can email me at longboxreview@gmail.com. You can always hit me up on Twitter as well, as both Damian and Matt have mentioned, at longboxreview. So thanks for watching, those who have been watching. Thanks for everybody in the chat who have commented, and the conversation. I've been following the conversation about other things. Sorry we didn't get to some of these comments, but I really appreciate you guys showing up and chatting with us a little bit. And that's it. I guess we will talk some other time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.